The microphone stand scrapes on the polished wood floor, a sound like a fingernail dragging across a tombstone. It pulls my focus from the glittering crowd, from the hushed clinking of champagne flutes, from the cloying scent of lilies that feels like a shroud settling over everything. My husband, David, stands bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, his teeth flashing in a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Not tonight. Not ever, really, not when he looks at me. He clears his throat, the sound amplified, booming through the ballroom like a judgment. My in-laws, radiant in their gilded chairs on the small stage beside him, beam up at their son. 50 years of marriage. A lifetime of carefully constructed appearances. And tonight, David is about to use their golden anniversary as a stage. I feel a knot tightening in my stomach, a cold, familiar dread. This isn't a toast. I know his tells. The slight tilt of his head, the way he grips the microphone like it's a weapon, the predatory gleam in his eyes when he's about to deliver a cut disguised as humor. He looks directly at me now, across the sea of smiling faces, and the smile on his face stretches, widening, revealing a cruelty I've become intimately familiar with. The air feels thick, charged with unspoken intent. My hands, resting on my lap, are trembling slightly. I clench them, digging my nails into my palms, grounding myself in the small, sharp pain. He opens his mouth, and I brace myself for the first strike. It feels like falling, slow and inevitable. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. It started so simply, as things often do before the rot sets in. A quiet life, built brick by careful brick. We met in a coffee shop near the university, two strangers buried in books, both reaching for the same worn copy of a poetry anthology. Our fingers brushed. A spark, they call it. Or maybe just the friction of two lonely souls finally touching. He was charming, quick-witted, ambitious. He saw something in me, or so he said. He saw potential, resilience. He saw a future. I saw kindness, or what I mistook for it. I saw a man who seemed to understand the quiet ache inside me, the need for stability, for belonging. We built a home. Not a grand one, but ours. Filled with shared jokes, late-night conversations, the comforting rhythm of two lives intertwined. We talked about dreams, about children we might have, about growing old together in a house filled with laughter and warmth. He worked in finance, the kind of job that demanded long hours but promised security. I worked in publishing, a world I loved, filled with stories and the quiet satisfaction of shaping narratives. We were a team. We supported each other. Or so, I believed. The first crack was almost imperceptible. A dismissive wave of his hand when I talked about a challenging project at work. A subtle eye roll when I voiced an opinion that differed from his. Small things, easily explained away as stress, as a bad day. My friends noticed before I did, perhaps. A casual comment here, a concerned glance there. I defended him. He's just tired, I'd say. He doesn't mean it. We all have our moments. I smoothed over the edges, painted over the cracks with the brush of my own optimism, my own desperate need for the picture-perfect life I thought we were building. Then came the jokes. Publicly, at first, small and seemingly innocuous. At a dinner party, I'd share an anecdote, and he'd chime in with a punchline that wasn't quite funny, but subtly undermined my point, painting me as naive or overly emotional. It was always wrapped in a smile, delivered with a tone that made it sound like affectionate teasing. But the sting was real. The way people chuckled, unsure how to react, glancing between his smiling face and my own, which I struggled to keep composed. He'd catch my eye, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Smugness? Power? Before the charming mask settled back into place. He started questioning my decisions, my capabilities, my judgment, my intelligence. Quietly at first, in the privacy of our home. About managing the household budget, about my career choices, about how I spent my time. He wasn't just disagreeing, he was implying I was incompetent. Incapable. that I needed his guidance, his superior intellect, to navigate the complexities of life. The man who had once admired my resilience now seemed determined to chip away at it, piece by careful piece. The jokes grew sharper, more frequent. They followed us everywhere, to family gatherings, out with friends, even during quiet dinners alone, though then they weren't jokes, but outright criticisms, delivered with a chilling lack of empathy. He'd wait until I was feeling confident, sharing something I was proud of, before landing the blow. It was like he couldn't stand to see me shine, not even a little. He needed to dim my light to feel brighter himself. He was hollowing me out, scooping out my self-worth like marrow from a bone. And I, in my desperation to save the marriage, to save the man I thought I loved, let him. I shrank. I second-guessed myself. I started believing the narrative he was crafting, that I was less than, that I was lucky to have him. I tried talking to him. Oh, how I tried. Late into the night, tears streaming down my face, begging him to stop, to see what he was doing, to remember the person he married. He'd listen sometimes, his expression a carefully neutral mask. He'd apologize sometimes, but the apologies felt hollow, rehearsed. And the behavior would resume, often within days. He'd deny it, gaslight me, turn my pain back on me. "You're too sensitive," he'd say. "It was just a joke. Can't you take a little teasing? My family teases each other all the time," or, worse, "I'm just trying to help you." Someone needs to tell you the truth about yourself. The truth, according to him, was that I was flawed, inadequate, a constant disappointment. My attempts to fix things became more frantic, more desperate. I read self-help books, went to therapy alone. He refused to join me, saying I was the one with the problem. Tried to change myself, thinking if I could just be better, more polished, less sensitive, maybe he would stop. But the target kept moving. The criticisms shifted. It wasn't about making me better, it was about keeping me down, keeping me small, keeping me under his control. Then the financial control began. Slowly at first. Questions about my spending, even on necessities. Suggesting I didn't need my own separate accounts, that we should combine everything for simplicity. Simplicity in his world meant he had access to everything, and I had to ask for permission. He started making unilateral decisions about our money, large investments I knew nothing about until after they were made. My salary, once a source of pride and independence, felt like it dissolved into a joint pool from which he doled out allowances. The man who had promised security was building a cage around me, piece by careful piece, using money as the bars. The public mockery escalated. It wasn't just jokes anymore, it was pointed commentary, designed to elicit uncomfortable laughter from others at my expense. At his work Christmas party, he made a toast where he joked about how I couldn't even boil water without setting off the smoke alarm, painting me as utterly helpless and incompetent in the kitchen. This, from a man who had never cooked a meal in his life. The forced smiles from his colleagues, the way they avoided my eyes, it was suffocating. Each comment was a tiny blade twisting in my gut. It wasn't just about humiliating me, it was about establishing a narrative for others. He was shaping their perception of me, making me out to be foolish, incapable, someone not to be taken seriously. He was isolating me, subtly, expertly, from the outside world. He was poisoning the well. I started withdrawing. From friends, from social events. The anxiety of waiting for the next barb, the next public humiliation, was too much. It was easier to stay home, to avoid the stage he seemed determined to push me onto, where I was always the punchline. My world shrank. My vibrant life, filled with connections and passions, became smaller, dimmer, confined to the four walls of a house that no longer felt like a home, but a prison. The lowest point came when I needed his support the most. My mother fell ill, critically ill. I needed to be with her, hundreds of miles away. He made it difficult. Complained about the expense, about being left alone, about how I was abandoning him. He made me feel guilty for tending to my dying mother. He turned my grief into an inconvenience for him. When she passed, and I returned, heartbroken and raw, he offered no comfort, no solace. Instead, he complained about the state of the house, the meals he'd had to eat, the piles of laundry. My profound sorrow was met with petty grievances. It was then, sitting in the sterile silence of our living room, the echoes of my mother's last breath still ringing in my ears, that something inside me broke. Or maybe finally solidified. I looked at him, this man I had promised to love forever, and saw a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger who fed on my misery, who seemed determined to break my spirit. The love I had felt curdled into something bitter, something akin to disgust. The desperate hope I'd clung to, the belief that the man I married was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of insecurity and cruelty, died in that moment. There was no him to save. This was him. This was the truth. The decision wasn't sudden, not really. It was a slow build, like pressure accumulating deep underground, until the rock finally fractures. The gaslighting, the financial control, the relentless chipping away at my self-worth, the final, brutal indifference to my grief, each was a blow. But it was the pattern, the deliberate, escalating nature of his cruelty, especially the public humiliation, that finally galvanized me. He didn't just want to control me, he wanted to break me in front of witnesses. He wanted the world to see me as he saw me, a pathetic figure. And I realized, with a chilling clarity, that I could either let him succeed, let him grind me down to dust, or I could refuse. I could fight back. Not just leave quietly, tail between my legs, but fight back in a way that was undeniable, public, and mirrored his own chosen weapon, the stage. The anniversary party was looming. Invitations had gone out months ago. My in-laws' golden jubilee. A huge affair, planned for a ballroom at one of the city's most prestigious hotels. Everyone would be there, family, friends, colleagues, important business contacts. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that David would use this platform. It would be his grandest stage yet. He wouldn't just give a polite toast. He would find a way to diminish me, to reinforce his narrative of my inadequacy, in front of everyone who mattered to him. The thought of it made my blood run cold. The idea of sitting there, smiling stiffly, enduring another public dismantling of my character, was unbearable. But then, a different thought took root. A cold, sharp, exhilarating thought. What if the stage wasn't just his? What if I could use it too? What if I could turn his grand performance into the setting for my own? This was the turning point. Not just the decision to leave, that had been forming for months, but the decision to leave with a bang. A carefully orchestrated, legally sound, undeniable bang. I wouldn't disappear quietly. I would make a statement. A statement that said I was not the pathetic creature he tried to paint me as. A statement that took back my narrative, my dignity, in the most public way possible. He wanted an audience for my humiliation? Fine. He would have one. But it wouldn't be my humiliation they witnessed. I started making calls. Quietly, secretly. To lawyers. I needed someone sharp, discreet, and willing to think outside the box. I couldn't afford mistakes. He controlled the finances, but I still had my own small savings, carefully hidden, built from years of tucking away tiny amounts he wouldn't notice. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a consultation, enough for a retainer, enough to set things in motion. I found her. Sarah. Recommended by a colleague who had gone through a difficult divorce. Sarah listened patiently, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp. As I laid out the pattern of emotional abuse, the financial control, the public humiliation, she didn't flinch. She didn't tell me I was too sensitive. She just nodded, taking notes, asking precise, clinical questions. When I told her about the anniversary party, about my certainty he would use it to mock me, and my idea, she paused. Looked at me over the rim of her glasses. A slow smile spread across her face. That's bold, she said. Risky, but potentially very effective. We discussed the legalities. Serving divorce papers. It had to be done correctly. By a process server. It had to be witnessed. Doing it at a public event, while unconventional, was perfectly legal. The risk wasn't legal, it was social, emotional. But social and emotional were his chosen battlegrounds. It felt right to fight him there. The next few weeks were a blur of secret meetings, whispered phone calls, gathering documentation. It was harder than it should have been, with him watching my every move, monitoring my spending. I had to be incredibly careful. I made excuses for my absences, claimed migraines, lunch with old college friends he didn't know. I felt like a spy in my own home, navigating familiar rooms with a new sense of purpose, a cold determination replacing the familiar fear. Every lie I told him felt like a small act of rebellion, a reclaiming of agency. The plan solidified. Sarah and I went over the details again and again. The timing, the location. The process server, a large, no-nonsense woman named Brenda, who looked like she could handle herself in a crowd. The papers themselves, meticulously prepared, detailing the grounds for divorce, my requests regarding assets, which he would surely fight tooth and nail, a request for spousal support given his control over our finances. It was all there, printed on official-looking paper, waiting for the right moment. The anniversary party arrived like a dark star on the horizon. The days leading up to it were a strange mix of tension and surreal calm. I went through the motions, helping my mother-in-law with last-minute details, feigning enthusiasm, feigning the perfect daughter-in-law facade I'd perfected over the years, packing my small bag, just the essentials, hidden in the back of my closet, arranging for a quiet place to stay after the inevitable explosion. David seemed oblivious. He was wrapped up in the importance of the event, in his role as the proud son, in the speech he was preparing. He probably saw me as just another prop in his performance, a silent, smiling figure by his side. The night itself was a tapestry of forced smiles and glittering superficiality. The ballroom was opulent, filled with the city's elite, a who's who of his world. My in-laws were beaming, accepting congratulations, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. David was in his element, working the room, charming everyone, playing the part of the devoted husband and son. He kept me close by his side for the first hour, a carefully curated accessory, introducing me with a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "My wife," he'd say, his voice smooth, possessive. The man who belittled me in private paraded me in public as a symbol of his success. Every interaction felt performative. Every laugh was a little too loud, every compliment a little too saccharine. The air conditioning was too cold, but I felt like I was burning up from the inside out. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Brenda, the process server, was somewhere in the crowd, dressed in a discreet black dress, blending in. Sarah was nearby, a silent, watchful presence. We had planned this meticulously. The speeches began. My husband's older brother spoke first, warm and genuinely affectionate. Then his sister, funny and heartfelt. And then it was David's turn. He strode to the microphone stand on the small stage, his figure silhouetted against the elegant backdrop. The room quieted, all eyes on him. He smiled, a broad, confident smile. He started with anecdotes about his parents, sweet stories from his childhood. He praised their enduring love, their strength. It was all so convincing, so polished. He sounded like the perfect son, the perfect husband. And then he turned just slightly and looked at me. The smile didn't drop, but the light in his eyes shifted. It was my turn. I knew it. He cleared his throat again, the microphone amplifying the sound. "And I couldn't stand here tonight," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Without mentioning my own wonderful wife," he paused, letting the anticipation build. I kept my expression neutral, a slight, polite smile on my face. Inside, I was a coiled spring, vibrating with tension. This was it. The moment he would deliver the blow, in front of everyone. "My wife," he continued, his voice taking on a subtly patronizing tone. "Bless her heart. She's quite something." A ripple of polite laughter went through the crowd. He loved that. He loved making people unsure whether to laugh with him or at me. She's always been so creatively minded. Not exactly, grounded in reality. Bless her more nervous laughter. He was warming up. "Reminds me of the time she tried to, balance the checkbook and somehow ended up donating our entire savings to a cat charity in Uzbekistan. This was a complete fabrication, a twisted exaggeration of a small, insignificant mistake I'd made years ago with online banking, which he had blown up into a major catastrophe at the time. Now, it was a funny anecdote for the masses. The laughter this time was more genuine, more relaxed. People were starting to get it. They were starting to laugh at me. My face felt frozen. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, but I held it together. Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction. Just breathe. Remember the plan. He leaned closer to the microphone, lowering his voice slightly, making it sound conspiratorial, intimate. She means well, you see. She really does. But sometimes you just have to smile and manage the situation for her. Like trying to explain quantum physics to a particularly stubborn golden retriever. You love her, but you know she's never going to quite grasp it. The laughter swelled. It washed over me, a hot, suffocating wave. I saw the faces of his colleagues, the wives I'd smiled with at office parties, their eyes now crinkling with amusement. I saw his family, some looking uncomfortable, others chuckling nervously, caught between loyalty and discomfort. And I saw my in-laws on the stage behind him, their smiles fixed, perhaps missing the full cruelty of the words, or perhaps choosing to ignore it. He chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. He was riding the wave of laughter, basking in the glow of his perceived wit, his cleverness, his superiority. He looked at me again, a triumphant glint in his eye. This was it. The culmination of his campaign of public humiliation. He had done it. He had successfully painted me as a lovable idiot, someone to be managed and gently mocked. He opened his mouth to deliver the final punchline, the one that would seal the narrative, the one that would make everyone look at me with pity or condescension. But the punchline never came. Just as the laughter began to subside, a figure emerged from the edge of the crowd. A woman, large and purposeful, dressed in black. She walked with a steady, unwavering gait directly towards the stage. She didn't look like a guest. There was an air of officialdom about her, a quiet authority that cut through the celebratory atmosphere. People turned their heads, curious. What was happening? David, still holding the microphone, his smile faltering slightly, watched her approach. His brow furrowed. His parents looked confused. The woman walked right up to the edge of the stage, directly in front of David, who was still standing at the microphone stand, bathed in the spotlight, his mouth slightly ajar, ready to speak. She stopped, reached into her large black clutch bag, pulled out a thick stack of papers, bound together, official-looking papers, and she held them out to him. His eyes widened. He stared at the papers, then up at her face, then back at the papers. His smile was gone, vanished, replaced by an expression of utter shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. The confidence drained from him, replaced by a pale, stunned silence. The ballroom, which moments ago had been filled with laughter, fell silent. A heavy, expectant silence. The process server, Brenda, held the papers steady. Her voice, amplified slightly by the sudden quiet and her proximity to the stage microphones, cut through the air, clear and utterly devoid of emotion. David Alexander Sterling, she stated, her voice ringing out in the stunned silence. You have been served. And she placed the thick stack of divorce papers directly into his trembling hand. His fingers closed around the papers as if they were burning him. He stared at them, then at Brenda, then back at the papers, his eyes darting wildly. The color drained from his face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Or perhaps like he had just been hit by a truck. He was still holding the microphone, the faint sound of static, the only thing filling the void left by his voice. His parents, on the stage behind him, were gasping, their smiles contorted into expressions of shock and outrage. Guests were murmuring, craning their necks, whispering. All eyes were no longer on the celebrating couple or on the witty son giving a speech. They were on David, standing frozen on the stage, holding the physical embodiment of the end of his marriage, delivered to him in the most public forum imaginable, at the precise moment he was attempting to tear me down. Brenda turned, gave a curt nod to me, a signal that the job was done, and walked calmly back through the crowd. David was rooted to the spot. The papers trembled in his hand. He looked utterly, spectacularly blindsided. He had set the stage for my humiliation, and I had used it to deliver his. He had expected me to sit there and take it, to shrink under the weight of his mockery. He had expected me to be the victim. He had never, in a million years, expected me to strike back, not like this, not here, not now. The man who prided himself on being in control, on being the smartest person in the room, had been outmaneuvered, publicly and irrevocably. The silence stretched, thick with tension.
He couldn't speak.
He couldn't move. He just stood there, on the stage he had chosen for his performance, the divorce papers a stark contrast to the celebratory backdrop, the microphone broadcasting his stunned silence to the entire room. It was a tableau of his own making, a monument to his hubris. My in-laws were starting to sputter, half rising from their chairs, looking from their frozen son to me, sitting composed at my table. Their faces were a mixture of fury and disbelief. They had been humiliated too, their golden anniversary celebration hijacked by the raw, ugly reality of their son's failing marriage. David finally seemed to snap out of his paralysis. He looked down at the papers in his hand, as if they were a venomous snake. Then he looked at me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and something else, fear? Recognition? The mask was completely gone. What was left was ugly and raw. He didn't scream.
Not then.
He just crumpled the papers slightly in his hand, his knuckles white. And he stumbled back from the microphone, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. The spell was broken. The room erupted into noise, shocked whispers, exclamations, the scraping of chairs as people began to move. I rose from my seat slowly, deliberately. All those months of shrinking, of trying to disappear, vanished. I stood tall. My legs felt steady. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. I didn't need to say a word. The papers in his hand, the stunned silence that had followed their delivery, the look on his face, that said everything. I walked towards the exit, not running, not rushing, but walking with a quiet dignity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't look back. Not at him, still frozen on the stage. Not at his parents, their faces twisted with anger. Not at the shocked faces of the guests. I just kept walking, through the murmuring crowd, towards the door, towards the life waiting outside. Leaving the ballroom felt like stepping out of a suffocating cloud. The night air was cool and clean. Sarah was waiting just outside the entrance, a small, knowing smile on her face. Brenda gave a final nod and disappeared into the night. He never saw it coming, Sarah said quietly.
No, Iraplia.
He didn't. There was no triumphant shouting, no gloating. Just a profound, weary sense of accomplishment. I had taken back my power. I had refused to be his victim. I had used his own chosen weapon, the public spectacle, to disarm him. He had wanted an audience for my humiliation. Instead, he got an audience for his comeuppance. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about survival, about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, from a man who had tried to steal them both. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. A firestorm. My phone exploded with messages, missed calls. His family was furious. His colleagues were gossiping. The carefully constructed facade of David Sterling, the charming, successful man with a slightly ditzy but harmless wife, had shattered in spectacular fashion. He was exposed, not just as a cruel husband, but as someone who could be publicly outmaneuvered, blindsided by the person he had consistently underestimated and belittled. For a man whose currency was control and perception, this was a devastating blow. The legal battle was difficult, as predicted. He fought dirty, using every tactic he could to drag things out, to make my life miserable. He tried to portray me as unstable, grasping, the villain who had ruined his family's celebration. But I had Sarah, and I had the truth. And crucially, I had witnesses. Hundreds of witnesses who had seen him standing on that stage, attempting to humiliate me and then witnessed his stunned, public downfall. His attempt to control the narrative after the fact was undermined by the unforgettable spectacle of that night. Slowly, painfully, the divorce proceeded. The financial mess he had created was untangled, revealing layers of reckless spending and questionable decisions. The man who had controlled my money because he believed I was incapable of handling it turned out to be the truly irresponsible one. It was a bitter irony. The feeling wasn't pure victory. How could it be? This was the end of a marriage, the death of a future I had desperately wanted. There was immense sadness for the lost years, for the person I had been before he started chipping away at me, for the person I had to become to survive him. Freedom came at a high price, but it was freedom nonetheless. The quiet dignity I felt walking out of that ballroom was real. The knowledge that I had faced him at his worst, on his chosen ground, and refused to break, that was real too. I learned that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty isn't resistance in the moment, but strategic action. That staying quiet and trying to appease someone determined to hurt you is a form of slow surrender. That your voice matters, and sometimes you have to shout, not with anger, but with the undeniable clarity of truth, delivered at the time and place that will have the greatest impact. He wanted a stage? I gave him one. He wanted an audience? They watched him fall. The shattered pieces of my life, scattered across that ballroom floor, were mine to pick up, to rebuild. This time, brick by careful brick, on a foundation of my own making. Stronger, wiser, and never again silent. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.